Hello and welcome to the DME podcast, brought to you by DME, the podcast booking platform. Whether you're a podcaster or an aspiring guest, the DME app is a perfect platform for you to get booked and manage your podcast bookings. I'm your host, Sukhay, the founder of DME, and on this podcast we'll be discussing the latest news and views in tech, the ins and outs of entrepreneurship, and even dipping our toes into the adrenaline-filled world of mixed martial arts. On today's episode, I'm excited to sit down with Aniko Ekhart, Professor of Artificial Intelligence at Aston University. Aniko has a long career in computer science, specialising with a PhD in genetic programming. In this conversation, Aniko shares her expertise in nature-inspired AI. We explore how AI mimics evolution, dive into its potential for medical diagnosis, and discuss the future of AI balancing innovation with ethics. This is another big brain conversation, but well worth your time. So let's jump in. Aniko Ekhart, welcome to the DME podcast. Thank you very much for joining. I was keen to speak to you. I think we met briefly a few weeks ago when recording the Dr. James Ball podcast. And I was always keen to speak to more learned people when it comes to artificial intelligence. And your background really intrigued me. So could you just give us a bit of introduction to yourself? At the moment, you're a artificial intelligence professor at Aston University.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's really such a pleasure to be part of your podcast series. So, yes, indeed, I'm Professor of Artificial Intelligence here at Aston University.
And how did you come to this position? So I think you've been in position for the last 2 years, is that right?
Well, if I count very precisely, 2.5 years, but I've actually been at Aston for over 19 years, and I basically went from lecturer through all the stages to professor here at Aston, which is probably a little bit less typical in academia. Usually people move from one institution to another, and that's when they get promotion. So that is more frequent than staying at the same institution.
So how did you begin your journey into computer science? And obviously your accent gives the game away a little bit. You're not native to Birmingham or to Aston.
Well, no, as much as I would like, I don't think I will ever become a proper Brummie. I cannot really do the Brummie accent, but I'm actually from Transylvania, which is a part of Romania, but I'm from Hungarian ethnicity. And after finishing my degree in computer science, I went to Hungary, to Budapest, to do my PhD. And following the PhD in Budapest, I came to Birmingham. At the time, University of Birmingham, and then I moved to Aston.
And what did you study your PhD in, if you don't mind me asking?
So for my PhD, I studied specific area of computer science and artificial intelligence, which is called genetic programming. This is part of the evolutionary computation, or more broadly speaking, the so-called nature-inspired techniques, where we try and imitate what happens in natural evolution, and we try and transcribe that into the world of zeros and ones, and in the case of genetic programming, computer programs. So something like automatic evolution of computer programs. Of course, this predates the times of ChatGPT writing computer code for you. And we were trying, and we are still trying to do this with the following the processes of evolution. So with the person specifying some key ingredients, what must be in the computer program, to actually get artificial evolution to produce a program that satisfies those requirements.
So that sounds really, really complex.
It is simpler than it sounds.
Oh, really? So do you mind breaking down kind of what processes in evolution you look to kind of extract? Obviously, I'm guessing you don't do the whole process of evolution, but there must be some key characteristics of evolution that you try to mimic in a computing coding.
Absolutely. You are quite right. And the driving principle of the evolutionary computation area is the survival of the fittest, the Darwinian principle of survival of the fittest. And the fact is more about the adaptation than the adaptation to change that we are trying to to mimic. So when I teach this to the students, I always draw a little table with the key concepts in natural evolution and what they are actually going to be when we do artificial evolution. So the things that we may make is the elements of genetics and inheritance from parents to children. And also the fact that those individuals that are better are the ones that tend to survive. So the survival of the fittest kind of goes in the direction that the individuals that are better compete better for the resources, and they are the ones who get the privileges to survive and to reproduce.
I guess that's taking the concept of coding languages being developed on top of coding languages, being developed on top of coding languages. And does it come to an extent where you come to a language that may be in use today that is unrecognizable from its parent or grandparent, great-grandparent?
We sometimes do. So some people actually do this sort of lineage. So follow the lineage as well as look at the outcome. But the way this works is we actually specify the ingredients. So we specify the language, so to speak, the language that can be evolved. So that means that if it is, for example, something like language with a small number of instructions, it's only those instructions that can come out. But the way that those instructions are combined and joined up together, that's what makes the computer program.
Okay.
But instead of a person or ChatGPT as such writing for us the lines of code, or if you like, it's quite a lot of the time we use tree-like structures, and the trees in algorithmic sense are similar to upside-down trees in reality, where the root of the tree is at the top and the leaves of the tree are at the bottom. So we kind of have branches growing from the roots and going towards the leaves, and we like to separate between the what can be on the leaves and what can be in what we call internal nodes of the tree. So basically we would have operations in the internal nodes, and we would have what we call terminal nodes, because they are at the end of the tree branches in the leaves. So to give you a little example, something like A plus B or 1 plus 2, which is a very, very simple formula, would show up with the plus at the root and the A as the left leaf and the B as the right leaf.
Right.
And if we were to create a much more complex formula with let's say addition, multiplication, division, and various other operators, we can make it as complicated and as big as we require.
So is that adding roots or is that adding leaves?
It typically starts from a root, then adding more nodes and stopping at the leaves.
Stopping at the leaves.
Stopping at the leaves. We always stop at the leaves, and we can build the trees in lots of different ways, but we would, and you are quite right, and perhaps I haven't yet explained that element. The way artificial evolution works is with a population of individuals that live and die together at the same time. So we start with one population of individuals which are created somehow. So we play that role of creating the initial population, which are typically randomly generated individuals. In this case, will be trees of random sizes and shapes and containing random values of everything that we allowed for. And then in each generation, because they will all live one generation and then they move on to the next generation and then to the next and to the next, a number of steps takes place. And these steps include first of all, what we call the evaluation of each individual. So this is different from nature. because we will have a guiding force that tells us how good each individual is. So if we had a tree A plus B and another tree that was, let's say, A to the power 3, we would have a so-called fitness function that will tell us that A plus B has a fitness value of 1, and A to the power 2, A square, has a fitness value of 2. So we could tell which one is better than the other one, whereas in reality, it doesn't really work like this. Sometimes it's perhaps those are the stronger, those who are perhaps the more pretty individuals somehow attract the attention of the others in the mating process. Whereas in artificial evolution, there is this fitness that guides the process, and then we mimic the operations of crossing over from the level of genes. So we try and combine together 2 trees to get an offspring.
Okay.
Or sometimes 2, it depends on how we want to do it. So it's either 1 or 2 children that come to life from 2 parents. And then we apply mutation as well, because we want to keep that element from nature that allows us to add unexpected new material. With the crossover, we combine 2 trees that we already knew what they were. So the output, even though there can be lots of different output depending on how we combine them, it's still fairly limited, and we might want to have the opportunity to add more novelty into the tree, and also to mimic what happens in nature, that mutations happen, and sometimes those mutations are detrimental, sometimes they make no difference, and sometimes they're actually quite helpful. So we mimic that as well. And then before we can actually apply these operators, there is what we call the parent selection. So we have a way, based on this fitness evaluation, from a population of potential parents, those that are more fit will get a better chance of being selected.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessarily always be selected, because that will be very deterministic and would not allow for subtle changes.
Okay, that's really fascinating. My immediate question that kind of leaped out to me was, how artificial is this evolution? Because it sounds like, because obviously there's people making the choices in here in terms of which trees and which roots, etc.
So there is a lot of randomness in this. So people make the choice in terms of deciding. So there is this big decision power of deciding how we determine the quality of these individuals. And that is usually some kind of error function. So if we have a problem where we know what we are looking for, what quality we are looking for, then, or we know that, let's say there is this input, and we want the computer program for this particular input to generate that specific output. We don't know what the program is that can produce it. We just know that this input needs to match that output. And we can have a number of these input-output pairs. And then when we do the fitness evaluation, we will say, well, if we pick this individual program, we run it on this input, we calculate, well, with that, we actually get to see the value, the output value that the program produces, and we compare that output value with the desired output value. And that gives us an error. And then we can combine all these errors on the individual so-called fitness cases into an overall error.
So you're ranking and scoring.
So that allows us to do a ranking and the scoring, but then the very specific individuals that get selected, we don't interfere into that manually. So that is not done in a deterministic way. So that is done with some randomness. So we will use very fancy terms such as tournament selection, which is perhaps for those who are football fans or any kind of sports team sports fan would know about tournaments, and that's got nothing to do with natural selection as such, but it's a fun terminology where we can, and it's very easy to explain, where we would say that if we have, let's say, two individuals competing in a tournament, then whichever of the two has a better fitness is the one that wins.
Sounds fascinating. Not sure I understand it fully, but can you explain some of the practical applications that you guys have used this area of study on, and some of the projects that you've worked on or led?
So I'm going to talk about the very new for me project, because I think it's quite easy to explain and hopefully easy to understand as well. It's related to the problem of transportation of air. We talk a lot about that when various logistics and delivery companies have to transport goods from certain locations to other locations, and they use very complex models of deciding who is to deliver what from what area to what other area. A lot of the time, there is a lot of empty space on the trucks, the delivery trucks, or in the containers. And that's what we refer to as transportation of air, because that space could be better utilized. And one of the recent problems that I've been working on in this is how to fill up containers with goods that need to be transported. And this, in fact, is not a new problem, but the way we are handling it is different to what's in the traditional literature, and it's also closer to the practical decisions, because companies that do containerized transport will not just have one single type of container. They will have a number of available containers, and it is not always the case that a container that's precisely twice the size of another container, that it costs twice the size. There could be all sorts of other implications in terms of the choice. And it's also the case that in the more traditional approaches, people would be looking at the problem of having one container of a given size and a lot of goods that would need to be transported, and to figure out how to best fill that container. Whereas what we are looking at is we have all these goods that do need to be transported, and we want to find the optimal set of containers to use without transporting too much air.
Right, okay. So it's maximizing efficiency.
Maximizing the efficiency. So it's like a kind of Tetris, if you like,
Yes.
if you remember the game, but 3D Tetris with various constraints and stability constraints. We can't fill the very heavy items on one side because then the truck might fall over, and things like that. Or if there are items that cannot be put on top of each other because they are fragile, then we might need to keep them separate.
Yeah, it's obviously you're catering for lots and lots of different variables there, not just to
Exactly. So this is the so-called the cargo container loading problem, and this one we actually approached with a very basic genetic algorithm. So we didn't apply genetic programming for. We approached it with a very simple genetic algorithm, but the trick was to use some clever heuristic algorithm in conjunction with the genetic algorithm.
So if you get that right, that could potentially be very lucrative, I imagine, for the big shipping companies.
No, I should hope so.
I hope you have shares in the IP. That's great. So I think moving on to general discussions on AI. So obviously we talk about evolution, and we think of it as a linear line over human evolution, for example, of a couple of 100,000 years. Obviously animal evolution a lot longer than that. But it seems like in the field of AI and computing especially, we seem to get peaks and troughs of kind of evolutionary development. And at the moment, it feels like we're in on the upward spike of a peak. With obviously, it's the last 2 years have been AI has been all the talk of the town. How do you see that evolution accelerating or decelerating, if anything, over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, everybody will have their own agenda to answer this question, and this is what this peak and troughs that you were referring to. They are the so-called AI summers, but most likely AI winters, when all delusion comes and everybody realizes, funders realize, actually this is not, there is this big hype and it's not what we were expecting, and then funding stops, and then it takes some years before it picks up again, and sometimes it's a new concept, it's a new application of a concept. And of course, we are living in the current hype of large language models and generative AI. And I think that while that is great and can help in quite a number of areas, I think it's also important not to lose track of other AI developments that exist and other methods that can be used to solve problems. And this sort of focus on problem solving is quite strong at the moment. But I also think that there is a strong focus on people really wanting to get things out of the conversational AI more. And while I'm not working that much on the conversational AI, and I'm more working on the optimization and looking at numerical problems, I can see that there is a lot that can be achieved there as well. And I think that medical diagnosis is, for example, an area of really, really great development. And I think that it will achieve a lot in the next coming maybe 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think it's doing this already. I was just recording a conversation I had with some doctor friends a couple of weeks ago, general practitioners, or one was a surgeon as well. And we were just talking about the AI and various large language models that are out there. And I said, well, the large language models essentially do, from a general practice doctor's perspective, it's doing what you already know. Right? A doctor has a year's worth of study and knowledge that they've built up. I'm not necessarily specializing in a specific area, but if a patient comes with symptoms A plus B plus C plus C, it's just eliminating possibilities and narrowing it down to a potential cause or potential problem with the patient. What AI is doing, nothing different really. It's just building on that same knowledge to say, if a patient presents with these symptoms, then the likely problem or outcome is going to be A, B, or C, and here's the treatments. So I think in that aspect, I think there's going to be a huge evolution in the healthcare sector, just on the basic diagnosis. I think there's lots of podcasts and other material whereby they're getting AI or large language models to examine people's scans and MRI scans and CT scans, and detecting with a high degree of accuracy potential cancer problems as well. So I'm not sure if you know anything about that or have looked into that at all.
Well, I know a little bit about that, and I think that this is indeed an area that is going to grow. And in fact, together with one of my colleagues, Dr. Shireen Fouad, we have an Impact Builder Award that's precisely to help radiologists and to train. So we are creating, so this is a research project by which we are developing a very tailored AI educational package to go from the very basics of AI understanding to the level of proficient use of AI by radiologists for purposes of medical image analysis. Right? So that is indeed an area of great development, and there is a lot of promise in that field. What I think is also important, that this element of being able to understand how the AI came to whatever decision it came in the diagnosis or differential diagnosis, that can be tracked. And that's important both for the education of the next generation of doctors, but also for the credibility and for the trust. So we definitely want both doctors and patients to trust that what comes out of the system is indeed the case that is supported by evidence.
Yeah, so I think that's when you see technology implemented in other fields, I'm immediately thinking to kind of my passion for football and how they've got the VAR system there. And even in cricket, actually, you've got umpire, the human in the factor defaults to the technology to make the decision. Because if it's the technology that makes a mistake, the human instinct is, well, at least it wasn't me. So I think we're talking regulation and ethics, aren't we, here in the AI and general society fields? But I think you're right. It does need to be transparent in terms of how an AI model has come to that outcome, and you can actually trace that, because obviously it's that quality assurance and it is that confidence that.
I think it's absolutely key, and in particular in the medical area where a person's health is at stake. And the key focus of the research center here that we have here, the Aston Center for AI Research and Application, is really this concept of AI for social good. And to only do AI applications where we know that the application itself is going to benefit people. So I think that is very important that if we are looking at from the perspective of regulation, and the EU AI Act is already in place, the do no harm is the closest to this, that whatever we do, we want to make sure that it's stopped before anything bad happens. So for this to be the case, we want to make sure that if a doctor gets a diagnosis, let's say, made by an AI system, they can trace it back and they can check the evidence that is indeed the appropriate decision, and then whatever is the course of action recommended, because that might be another part of the AI system that recommends a particular treatment, and a lot of the time it is not quite clear which one is the best. The evidence can be followed up, and we build up this trust in the system, because I think that this proliferation of AI systems into society will only work if they are properly built into society and people get to trust these systems.
Yeah. So I think so do you think the academic side of it and trying to build AI systems for the good of society is a good counterbalance to the commercial side? We've got all the large tech companies all releasing their AI models, and they seem to be focused on automation and kind of making things more proficient and efficient, with less of a eye on the societal impacts or the societal benefits of it. Is that where the academic research kind of kicks in and kind of provides a natural balance to kind of the commercial interests of the big tech companies?
That, but also regulations. So regulations, but sometimes even regulations are not enough, because the regulations can be slow, or people can find ways to go around regulations. But it's also what is moral, what we think is the moral thing to do. And some of the efficiencies, for example, if it is, let's say, automation of some building of particular equipment, which would be very boring or physically demanding for people to do, that is absolutely great to automate. Or the example I always give to students is, if we remember the nuclear accident in Japan, which wasn't such a long time ago, and any sort of accident that may happen, then this kind of rescue operations or anything that happens in a dangerous environment, we really want to be able to have robots that are embodied AI to be available to actually take care and support us when it is really dangerous for us to go in. So it is important, and that is for efficiency purposes, but not just.
Yeah, that's a really good use case, actually, isn't it? So you send the robots in as opposed to the actual humans, are putting the humans in danger.
There are lots of different robots, so there can be little drones to go out and just take pictures and videos and transmit that and take instructions, and this sort of proper communication with the human. So some of it can be done autonomously, and there doesn't need to be any human intervention. But then there are elements when there is a part where they can't, perhaps a robot can't, or the drone, based on the images, the software can't actually tell whether there is a person or an animal that's in danger, or if there are several such cases, what is the priority, and then maybe the control needs to go back to the human.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. I think it's so deep. I don't think we'd cover it off in 1 half-hour podcast, or even a dozen half-hour podcasts, to be fair. But if people wanted to learn, or our listeners wanted to learn a little bit more about the work that the artificial intelligence research and application department at Aston University is doing? Where could they learn more about the department's work?
So we have a website. So we have an ACAIRA website. So if the acronym, or just Aston Center for Artificial Intelligence Research and Application, which is a mouthful, is entered into any search engine, this will come up on top. This is at the moment is a fairly simple website, but it includes our expertise and the list of our current projects. We have a lot of projects going on at the same time, because we are a fairly large center with 25 academics and their PhD students and a few postdoctoral researchers. And we work with companies in the region and in the UK. Some of my colleagues have European projects. Some colleagues have projects with, one of my colleagues has a medical project with Pakistan. So we are actually quite going very global, but at the same time we look at the very local important issues. We are working with Birmingham City Council and the West Midlands Authority, West Midlands Combined Authority. So we are trying to find ways of helping society, and at the same time we have very interesting, more theoretical projects where we are trying to really push the boundaries of understanding.
That's amazing. Well, we'll link to the website in the description of the podcast. But Aniko, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining the DME podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.